that the Iranians do not keep their assets out in the open. All of these underground bases that we've seen and heard about for the last year or so, they are where Iran stores its assets, in these different underground bases. So whenever the Americans say we targeted a storage for Iranian drones, they're talking nonsense. The Iranians, they keep their drones and their missiles and other military hardware in deep down underground in a protected area. They take them out and they fire them. And then the soldiers, they also go to protected areas. If there's anything outside of those underground bases, they're spread out. They're not like in groups. So you'll have missiles hidden in different areas, and then they can launch them without using the tunnels in the bases. So it makes it very difficult, if not almost impossible, for the Americans to destroy these assets. And thus, they haven't had much success. For example, with many of the fires that we've seen, these are civilian targets. They've been bombing ports. They've been bombing boats that belong to the public, that are privately owned. They're fishing boats, barges, and that sort of thing, for the most part. And the Americans, out of spite, attack them. So they've attacked civilian targets in a number of places, including, as we all remember, the railway link between Iran and Central Asia and between Tehran and Mashhad during the funeral, right hours before the funeral in Mashhad. So that's why it's very difficult for the Americans to destroy Iran's military capabilities. On the other hand, the Iranians have a much easier time in taking out American assets because they're not in underground bases. They're in these. They're stored inside uh, buildings, or they're just protected from the heat. But they're all on the ground. They're not underground. So when an Iranian drone strikes a building or strikes something on a U.S. base, it causes a lot of damage unless that building is empty. But still, the building won't be used in future, especially under these circumstances where the weather can be up almost 50 degrees and the humidity is sometimes 100% in these countries, and which is very bad for U.S. weapon systems. The Iranians also, as you pointed out, they struck Oman for the first time, and they struck very hard, and it was a surprise attack, and they destroyed U.S. assets in Oman, including those radar systems and jamming devices that were used to help ships get through the Strait of Oman. And another target that the Iranians have, which is very useful, are the tankers and the ships that try to pass through the Strait of Hormuz through the American corridor, which is a violation. Its very existence is a violation of the MOU. And last night they again struck tankers, and the price of oil, I think, has gone up in the last 2-3 days by, I don't know, maybe $10-15 by now. So the Iranians have shut the Strait of Hormuz, of course. The Americans have imposed a siege, but the Iranians have an advantage. And that is that ever since the MOU was signed, the Iranians have begun, they swiftly exported tens of millions of barrels of Iranian oil. A lot of tankers full of oil were stuck in the Persian Gulf while the siege was in force. The Iranians filled up all the tankers that they existed in the Persian Gulf. They prepared them for the day when they could leave, and as soon as the MOU was signed, Iran exported that oil, and they've been exporting a lot more oil than other countries in the Persian Gulf because they were prepared. They had prepared themselves for this situation, and they prioritized their own ships, obviously. And Iran imported a lot of essential goods, which it couldn't during those 2 months. And on the other hand, the Americans have not been able to lessen the oil shortage, or and the other goods produced in the Persian Gulf, like helium, like fertilizers, everything that's produced through the petrochemical plants. Those shortages have actually increased because the number of ships that have been passing through the Strait of Hormuz are very limited in number, but disproportionately they've been for oil. So the oil shortage may not have worsened, but it definitely hasn't improved. So when Trump said back then, when the MOU was signed, that we only had 4 weeks of um, oil reserves, I don't think the situation has changed much since then. So Iran has prepared itself, uh, and the Americans are not in a good situation. And very swiftly, when the Americans began to strike Iran, the Iranians struck back very hard during the last few nights. And last night in particular, Iran has been hitting very hard, and it's been it has made sure that tankers no longer go through. So I think one of the mistakes that the Americans made was that in the past, the Iranians would not hit the tankers, or rarely would they hit them, or with light drones, or rarely would they hit them hard. And but during the last 24, 48 hours, the Iranians have been hitting tankers very hard, and with missiles, not with drones. And that, of course, is in order to make sure that other tankers no longer pass through. So the American corridor has become very costly and very dangerous for ships. And that's partially why the price of oil has gone up so dramatically.
There were two reports yesterday. One of them said that Iran has hit two super tankers that belong to UAE. And the United States was trying, as IRGC announced, that they were trying to, they said in that announcement that these two tankers were deceived by the United States that they're going to have a safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Then Iran warned them, they didn't listen, and they went in on a route full of mines, and they got hit by missiles. And this is, I don't know what was the situation in the strait. Last night we've learned that the United States is trying to force some of these super tankers into the strait in order to penetrate the blockade of Iran, or somehow the control of Iran on the strait.
Well, now the Iranians have closed the strait, and so have the Americans. So nothing is allowed to go through. And the Iranians, as you rightly pointed out, are using missiles. They're no longer just giving warnings or at most firing a drone. They're hitting the ships with missiles, and so that the other ships that are still in the strait, or sorry, in the Persian Gulf, or outside in the Sea of Oman, that they stay clear of the Strait of Hormuz. And also, for the first time, Iran, by hitting Oman, a lot of American assets that were being used against Iran were destroyed. And Iran took the Americans by surprise, and Oman by surprise, because they allowed the Americans to do this. And that damage has made it much easier for the Iranians to be able to strike these tankers that refuse to abide by the demands of the Iranian Navy. So, Nima, this is not a war that the Americans can win, and Iran is hitting back very hard. And Trump says he's going to hit very hard. He said last night he'll hit hard, and tonight I'm sure the Iranians are going to continue to hit back very hard. And each day that goes by, the shortage of energy grows, the shortage of other supplies grow, and the world moves closer towards an economic crisis. Something that Trump himself said. It's not as if he's ignorant of all this. He literally pointed it out when in the United States, people among the political elites were attacking him for signing the MOU, which was clearly a text that favored Iran.
In there are people arguing, why did Iran decide to sign MOU, criticizing Iran for this and that. And there are some internal and external concerns on the part of Iranian, those decision makers. And one of them is that it's not just about the United States benefiting from the MOU or the situation after the signing of the MOU. It was Iran as well using that. One of the reports came out today on Washington Examiner. It says that in 26 days between the signing of the US Iran MOU and the recent reinstatement of the US blockade, Tehran shipped more than $6 billion worth of oil products and to foreign buyers. This is that. What is the sentiment on the part of Iranians? Well, how do they feel? I'm talking about those decision makers, those people who are, involved in the negotiation, in the talks, or were involved in the negotiations.
There are different views. There are some who say we shouldn't have signed any deal. And they believe that we should have continued the war. And they have their own argument to make. They said that the Americans were on the back foot. We should just have continued until they capitulated. Those who were in favor of sanctions were saying, well, we too were in need of supplies. We were in need of money to support the population, to support the armed forces, and to support our allies across the region. And then, but even among those who were in favor of negotiations, there were two, let's say, different views. Some were saying they should have gained more concessions, and some were saying that this is enough. I personally think we could have had more concessions, and I think that my opinion, as you know, when we've discussed this offline during the past few months, my opinion was that we should have continued the war for a few more days, the 39, 40-day war. And I also think that we should have signed the MOU a couple of weeks later to put increased pressure on the United States over the oil market. But that was my opinion. But there were others who were saying, well, the Iranian government needs money to run the country, and our allies across the region need financial support. And my belief is that we've probably sold significantly more than $6 billion worth of oil. But in any case, I think that on the whole, though, the Iranians had the upper hand with regards to the MOU, because during this period, the Iranians very swiftly, Iran knew that the United States was not going to abide by its commitments. I mean, in all the meetings that I've had or the discussions that I've had with people who are informed or semi-informed, no one believed that the Americans are going to carry out their commitments. Some were more skeptical than others, but in general, no one behind closed doors, I think, or in private conversations had the belief that like Trump was going to push the Israelis. But the argument was we need to buy time. We need to prepare ourselves for the next week, because the consensus, from my understanding, was that this is not over and we're going to have more siege and more warfare. And indeed, we had more siege and more warfare. So, and the Iranians knew that within the framework of the MOU, they could stop cooperating. They don't need to leave the MOU. All they have to do is say, you're not carrying out your commitments, we're not going to carry out ours. And this is where we are today. So the Iranians have stopped cooperating and allowing ships to go through. The Americans have done the same. That's Iran's strongest weapon against the United States. That's what basically forced the Americans to sign the MOU in the first place. So that's one aspect of it. One thing that I also wanted to point out is that there's this question that many raise about why is it that Iran doesn't strike the Israeli regime at the moment? And I think it's pretty clear. The reason is that this is the battle for the Strait. And the Americans have been violating all of their commitments and then creating this corridor in the Strait so that they would undermine Iran's leverage. And once they undermine Iran's leverage, then they don't have to carry out those commitments anymore, because the Iranians have no leverage to force them to do so. So the key was the Strait of Hormuz. And that's why the Iranians have been focusing on the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran loses in the Strait of Hormuz, Trump has the upper hand. If Iran wins in the Strait of Hormuz, Trump is defeated. And so all of the focus has been by the two sides on the Strait of Hormuz. So I think the priority right now is for the country to focus on defeating the United States. And so far, they've done a very, very good job. I don't see any scenario where the United States gets the upper hand. And remember, even if the United States somehow they launch a ground operation in this horrific heat in the Arabian Peninsula, like I guess I don't know what the temperatures are in Dubai and these other places, but must be somewhere near, I don't know, 45, 46 degrees. I don't know. But
It's more than
humidity is
that.
100.
It's more than that, Professor Mann. It's going to get to 55, 60, something like that.
Well, yeah, and then humidity at 100%. So even if it's 40, it's like 55 in Tehran. I mean, the 100% humidity is just.
Let's say it's Celsius, is not Fahrenheit.
Yes, Celsius. Yeah. So, assuming that the United States carries out a ground attack, and the Iranians are prepared for a ground attack. Let's say the Americans take this, some islands and take some of the mainland. The Iranians will lob missiles from across the country. And by the way, during the past few days, if you've noticed, the Iranians have not been using long-range missiles. They've been using short-range missiles and lots of drones. And so they are hammering the enemy, but they're not using long-range missiles. But in any case, if the Americans come in for land invasion, it won't make a difference because Iran can strike the entire Persian Gulf region and anywhere around the Strait of Hormuz from anywhere in Iran. From anywhere in Iran, they can target. So, but the good thing is that during the last night when the Americans were supposed to hit very hard and Trump said he's going to hammer Iran hard, Iran hit the U.S. much harder than the United States hit Iran. And last night, Iran has been very generous with its missiles and drones. It's been hitting very hard across the board.
Yeah. One of the American officials said that Trump is so serious about, let me bring the article here, as that Trump is so serious about the Strait of Hormuz and controlling the Strait of Hormuz, imposing a 20% toll on cargo transit in the Strait of Hormuz. And one of the American officials said, and what is that? And do they have the capabilities? What is the assessment on the part of? We had Iranian foreign minister responding to Donald Trump. Yeah, whoever controls the Strait of Hormuz has to have that sort of ability to charge the tankers and vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. What is that a new sort of psyop on the part of Donald Trump?
Well, have you seen Rubio's statement from like a couple of weeks ago, where he said taking fees or tolls is unacceptable, and so now Trump himself is saying, "I'm going to take 20%," and who is he going to take 20% from? His own proxies, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis. The very same countries who foolishly accompanied him and cooperated with him in carrying out this war. And the biggest losers in this war, the biggest losers are these countries by far. And so they are the biggest losers. And now Trump is saying, I'm going to take 20% from them. And Adolf Chi jokingly said, that's too much. We're going to be fair. In other words, Iran will get a lot less. So what Trump says, if you compare it to what Rubio says, they're the exact opposite. And thus, based on Rubio's statements, Trump should be condemned. Of course, Rubio says that these are this is an international waterway, which is not the case. There's no international waterway. it is not wide enough to be an international waterway. This is Iranian and uh, Omani territorial waters, and no one else's.
Yeah. The assessment, Professor Marandi, in the Strait of Hormuz is that uh, the United States, what is the understanding on the part of Iran? Is the United States preparing or sending more weapons to these GCC countries, or they're keeping their assets in Jordan, in Israel, or somewhere somehow far from the Iranian borders? Because they have used these HIMARS that we didn't know about it. We didn't know that they have these HIMARS in Bahrain and Kuwait, which were hit last night and then the night before. What is the understanding on the part of Iranians?
Well, during the 40 days of fighting, they did use HIMARS systems uh, in Kuwait and in Qatar, if I'm not mistaken, as well as in Bahrain and perhaps in the Emirates. But they did use HIMARS systems. What happened in Kuwait was that the Iranians bombed the HIMARS systems and its missiles. So, as you pointed out, we haven't seen the HIMARS systems being used last night by the Americans because at least a large, if not all of them, but a lot of them were destroyed, and apparently a number of Americans were killed, despite American denials. But Americans were killed in Kuwait, and some say in Jordan they also had casualties. Now the Iranians have been bombing Jordan, Kuwait, and all of these countries now during the last 24, 48 hours. But the Americans are using missiles. They are using tomahawks. Last night they bombed positions of Iran. But the problem is the fundamental problem that the United States has is that Iran has been preparing itself for this war. Ayatollah Khamenei, the martyr, his strategy was to create a network of well protected bases, uh, missile and drone, but also other uh, hardware for troops, for the Iranian speedboats, for its air defense systems, for everything, and have them and to build them across the country. So that and of course with many entrance points and every day or regularly with B-52 bombers. But they kept firing their missiles, and the Americans couldn't do anything. They couldn't damage the underground base itself, despite bombing it day and night with these heavy bombers. So it's very difficult for the Americans to score a big military achievement. All they can do at best, is strike some let's say um, antenna or radar uh, system. But the Iranians build uh, these uh, these these systems that are produced in Iran are very easy to replace, and Iran has many of them in storage for such a day. And of course, Iran has decoys everywhere. They've purchased huge amounts of Chinese decoys, and they also produce their own decoys. But the Chinese decoys are quite good. So the Americans keep bombing decoys. The Iranians put decoys all over the place, like radar systems, antennas, missile systems, and so on. And so that keeps the Americans busy. And of course, as I said, Iranian assets are underground. So again, the Americans can keep bombing, but they don't get the sort of results that they want to. And if anyone says that, oh, well, this is just Iranian propaganda, uh, just as the propaganda myth of Iranians not liking the regime and so on, that sort of nonsense, we saw that busted in the funerals. But this myth is also uh, can also be dealt with. The U.S. power and its um, the claim that the Americans have a superior the upper hand on the battlefield. During the 40-day war, We saw the Americans constantly saying how they're destroying everything Iran has, and they kept putting out videos and of targets being destroyed. Many of them were decoys, and I showed some of them in my Twitter accounts how to show how it was clear that they were decoys. But all of that aside, after the fighting ended, we saw the Washington Post and the New York Times admit that Iranian underground bases were intact and that Iran's missile and drone capabilities were largely intact. And the Iranians were saying it's even, the situation is far better than what even the Washington Post and the New York Times admit. But we'll leave that aside. On the other hand, we then saw evidence of US bases in the Persian Gulf destroyed or half destroyed. So during the war, when you watch the Western media or you listen to the Western media or Western government, the US government or the Israeli regime, you'd think that Iran was being wiped out and that they were just bombing day and night. But after the war ended, it turned out that the reality was very, very different. And I think it's clear as day that the situation now is probably even worse for the West.
Yeah, here we have the footage of that railway bridge in Aqala in Golestan, which was hit, which they tried to sabotage. In my opinion, it was some sort of sabotage or hit, But they have constructed that bridge in less than 24 hours, and we have the footage right now of that specific bridge, which is so important. Basically, this bridge connecting Iran to Kazakhstan and to China, and is of particular importance for Iran economically. And it seems that they have managed, it's getting back to work.
And remember, I know you know this, but your viewers should keep in mind that this is on the other side of Iran. The fighting is in the Persian Gulf,